All right, now with all of this stuff going on, it's not looking good for the WNBA right now. I will say it is helping that Unrivaled's ratings are absolutely atrocious and embarrassing. But all in all, it seems like a lot of these ladies that the WNBA has helped, because at the end of the day, they have not been making money. The WNBA has
not
been
looking
helping
good
these.
doesn't even begin to cover it, because what's unfolding right now isn't just another WNBA headline or social media dust-up. This feels bigger, heavier, almost dangerous. We're watching the early signs of an existential crisis, one that cuts straight to the heart of the league's future. The very league Caitlyn Clark dragged into the mainstream in 2024, revived with ratings, attention, and money, now looks like it could fracture from the inside. And the cruel irony is impossible to ignore. The pressure isn't coming from outside critics or rival leagues. It's coming from within. From players who directly benefited from the spotlight she brought, who cashed the checks, gained the exposure, and enjoyed the growth. Now, those same hands look like they are tightening around the blade. And the question no one wants to ask out loud is whether they even realize who's going to get cut when it finally falls.
To this point where it could be death, okay? The first one is, okay, the WNBA and WNBPA agreed on a groundbreaking CBA in 2020, okay? So they agreed on that CBA. That was cool. Now, this was important here.
ESPN just laid out 11 specific events that dragged the WNBA to this exact breaking point, where the Players Association and the league are locked in a total CBA stalemate. But here's the part they won't spell out for you. 3 of those 11 moments matter more than all the rest combined, and one of them changes everything. This didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't accidental. There's a clear chain reaction that brought us here, decision by decision, misstep by misstep, until the league arrived at this crossroads. And once you really understand how this timeline unfolded, you start to see why this isn't just about money or negotiations anymore. This is about leverage, power, and survival. This is about how the league may have backed itself into a corner so tight that the unthinkable is suddenly on the table. Because when you connect the dots the way ESPN won't, it raises a question that should make every WNBA fan uneasy. This standoff could genuinely mark the beginning of the end of Caitlyn Clark's future in the
2020,
WNBA.
the WNBA announced the bubble season. Now, that was during a crazy time in the world. They started the wobble, and they played games. And Kathy Engelbert, for y'all that don't know, Kathy Engelbert had to beg these players to play, or there would be no more WNBA. A lot of these players wanted all of their money up front plus extra. Kathy Engelbert got that done. A lot of these players was willing to let this league die out in 2020.
June 2020. Remember the bubble season? Most fans don't know this part of the story, but it matters more than almost anything happening right now. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert didn't just organize that season. She had to literally beg players to participate. Not ask, beg. Because without the bubble, without games being played during the pandemic, the WNBA was on the brink of disappearing entirely. Players wanted full salaries paid up front, plus hazard pay bonuses, while the league was bleeding money by the day. It was a financial free fall. Somehow, Engelbert pulled it off, convinced enough players to show up, kept the doors open, and saved the league from collapse. And here's the detail that changes how you see today's standoff. Many of the same players who were willing to let the league die in 2020 are now at the center of today's impossible demands.
Is a big part, okay? That's a big deal, because that shift the balance in power between the private owners that just own WNBA teams and the owners that own WNBA, NBA teams. And now you have this investor group in that situation, that extra 16% that shift the balance in power. Something else that happened was a Liberty were fined for illicit chartering. Now, being that the New York Liberty got fined $500,000 for doing their own private chartering. The owner did whatever.
February 2022 changed everything with one massive capital raise. $75 million poured in from new investors and existing owners, the largest funding round in women's sports history at the time. On the surface, it looked like a victory lap. Proof the league had arrived. But buried inside that headline was a trade-off that would come back to haunt everyone. The WNBA gave up 16% equity to outside investors. And just like that, the power structure fractured. 42% controlled by WNBA-only owners. 42% by NBA owners who also run WNBA teams. And now, 16% owned by investors whose only loyalty is to returns. 3 factions, 3 agendas, 3 very different ideas of risk, growth, and revenue sharing. That balance shift matters more than people realize, because when CBA negotiations hit, you're no longer dealing with one unified vision. You're dealing with competing interests trying to divide the same pie. And that's when things stop being about basketball and start getting very ugly, very fast.
An issue, that was an issue. Okay, in 2023, the Aces kickstart facilities race. All right, so now you see you starting to see these teams put this money into these facilities. Right now, the Aces have a really great owner who's willing to spend money on the best coaches, the best facilities. He'll fly in private on his own. He's willing to do things that other owners wasn't. Now we are about to get to the big part right here. Okay, all right.
Then it escalated. The Liberty got hit with a $500,000 fine for chartering flights. Their owner, Joe Tsai, looked at the situation, looked at his resources, and decided his players deserved every possible advantage. Private flights, better recovery, less wear and tear. The league stepped in immediately and shut it down. Not allowed. Competitive imbalance. $500,000 gone. At the same time, Mark Davis in Las Vegas was pouring money into the Aces, building elite facilities, hiring top-tier staff, and creating a championship machine without apology. 2 owners, 2 philosophies, one willing to spend whatever it takes to win, another forced to pay a massive penalty for doing the same thing in a different way. And sitting underneath all of it is the same uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. Some owners are ready for big league investment. Others are not. And that growing gap between those pushing the league forward and those dragging their feet has been quietly building pressure for
new
years.
Money, yada, yada, yada. This was the biggest part right here. And this, I believe, is one of, if not the biggest thing in why we are at this point, is because of this brilliant young lady here, Caitlyn Clark. April 2024, Caitlyn Clark drafted into WNBA. Spotlight intensifies. Remember that. Spotlight intensifies. Fresh off a record-breaking senior season at Iowa, Clark was drafted number 1 in the 2024 draft by the Indiana Fever.
Now we get to April 2024. And this is where everything truly flips, because this is the moment that reframes every single thing that came before it. Caitlyn Clark goes number 1 overall to the Indiana Fever, and the draft itself averages 2.45 million viewers. Not the game. Not opening night. The draft. Millions of people tuning in just to hear her name called and see which jersey she would put on. That level of gravity was completely unprecedented, and the WNBA had never experienced anything even close to it. The league wasn't prepared. They didn't know how to protect her from the pressure. They didn't know how to build a marketing machine around her without alienating others. They didn't know how to manage the spotlight she dragged into every arena, every broadcast, every headline. But one thing was crystal clear from the jump. They absolutely knew how to cash in on everything she generated.
The biggest reason we are at this point, because I don't believe that without Caitlyn Clark, they would have the demands that they have. Period. Weeks later, the league announced it was transitioning to a full-time chartering program. Weeks later, yeah, some teams was flying private on back-to-backs. They was flying private for the finals. Weeks later, after Caitlyn Clark gets drafted, everybody flying private, every game. What we talking about? What we talking about? She changed this thing, man. She changed the expectation.
Here's the thing about Caitlyn Clark's impact that people still don't fully grasp. It wasn't just about ratings and attendance, even though those numbers shattered records. It was about resetting the entire expectation level for what WNBA players believed they could demand. Just weeks after Clark was drafted, the league announced full-time charter flights for every team. Not just for the playoffs, not just for back-to-backs, but every single flight. That decision added millions of dollars in operating costs almost overnight, money the league had insisted for years simply didn't exist. So why did it suddenly appear? Because the optics of the league's biggest star flying commercial while being physically targeted every night would have been a public relations nightmare. Charter flights had been a long-standing player request tied to safety and recovery, and the answer was always the same: not financially possible. Then Caitlyn Clark arrived, and suddenly it wasn't just possible, it was non-negotiable. In that moment, everything players thought they knew about the league's limits changed.
Of the league spots rise in popularity, other college stars such as fellow 2024 draftee Angel Reese and more recently Paige Beckers also brought in significant followings. I will argue the Paige Beckers thing because Paige Beckers can't draw no ratings in Unrivaled. Paige Beckers had the third lowest attendance in all of the WNBA in Dallas last year. I don't believe Paige is the big star y'all try to make her to be. I just think Paige is a great, great basketball player, but that's just me. It became clear Clark was sort of a rising tide that helped lift all boats.
The numbers from Clark's rookie season weren't just impressive. They were borderline unreal. She fueled the highest attendance figures the league has ever seen. Viewership records didn't just break. They collapsed one after another. The WNBA finals between New York and Minnesota pulled the strongest ratings in 25 years, and Clark wasn't even on the floor for those games. That's how powerful her presence was. She lifted the entire league without touching the finals stage. Angel Reese benefited. Paige Beckers rode a wave of hype heading into the league. But let's stop pretending the field is level. Paige Beckers finished with the third lowest average attendance in Dallas last season. Her unrivaled numbers right now are rough. The narrative that there are several stars operating on Clark's level sounds nice, but it doesn't survive contact with reality. That's marketing, not math. Clark is the star, singular, and everyone inside the league understands that, even if saying it out loud feels
Clark-Reese
uncomfortable.
rivalry. This is not about rivalries or iconic personalities fueling a business model. WNBA Executive Director Terry Jackson said in a statement, "This kind of toxic fandom should never be tolerated or left unchecked. It demands immediate action and frankly should have been addressed long ago." So you had all of this nonsense. Now you got everybody calling all Clark fans racist, no matter what skin color they are. Now, Caitlyn Clark comes in, brings in all this fanfare, all this money. Boom, WNBA secures a monumental media deal. Okay, $2.2 billion deal.
Then came the media rights deal, and everything exploded. A staggering $2.2 billion over 11 years with Disney, Amazon Prime Video, and NBC Universal. Read that again, because it's real. $2.2 billion with AB. The old deal? Roughly $50 million spread across multiple years. This one is nearly 20 times larger, and it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because Caitlyn Clark turned WNBA viewership upside down in 2024. Players saw that figure and the calculators came out instantly. If the league is locking in $2.2 billion and the players are still receiving only a small slice of revenue, something is fundamentally broken. That ruleization flipped the switch. The Players Association knew this was their moment, their leverage window, and they took it. That's why they opted out of the existing CBA and forced the conversation now, not later, while the numbers were impossible to ignore.
NBC Universal. So now players is seeing the money, right? 2024, the players opt out of the previous CBA. Now, they might not even opted out. They may have opted out with or without Caitlyn Clark. They damn sure wouldn't have the demands that they have right now without Caitlyn Clark, but they may not have even opted out. Okay, boom, 2025 Unrivaled launches. Now, we know that Unrivaled was trying to get the WNBA out of here. We know that. They was trying to get them out of here, but it's 303 and the ratings are absolutely garbage right now. So that didn't work. That didn't work at all.
Now here's where everything turns messy. Unrivaled launched in January 2025. Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier's 3-on-3 league built on the promise of giving WNBA players a domestic off-season option so they wouldn't have to fly overseas. On the surface, it sounded noble, almost altruistic. But underneath that pitch was a sharper strategy. Unrivaled wasn't just basketball, it was leverage. If players had another league, even a modified version of the game, it shifted the balance of power in negotiations with the WNBA. In theory, it was a pressure point. In reality, it collapsed fast. The ratings have been brutal, barely scraping 300,000 viewers on a strong night. Meanwhile, Caitlyn Clark's regular season Fever games were pulling well over 1 million. That gap tells the whole story. The leverage play failed because the product didn't connect, because fans didn't show up, and because the one player who could have made Unrivaled unavoidable looked at it and walked away. When Caitlyn Clark said no, the illusion of power disappeared. And so did the threat.
Flat out called her a liar, and we know everything that took place from that. My point is, these things have led up. Some things more significant than others. That situation where Kathy Engelbert had to pretty much beg the players to play in the bubble, that was big. The Caitlyn Clark arriving to this league was the biggest, because now it's set an expectation for these players, and they're making all kind of demands that they never would be making without her, all while bashing the very people who are bringing in this money that they want to get. They want to bash them, but they want to capitalize off them. And this ultimately are some of the things that could lead to the potential death of Caitlyn Clark in the WNBA. Get down in the comments and let me know what you...
Where does this leave us? The WNBA and the Players Association are at a complete standstill. Negotiations have crumbled. Players want massive revenue shares, guaranteed contracts, the elimination of the salary cap, full free agency. They want it all. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Without Caitlyn Clark, most of these demands wouldn't even exist. The $2.2 billion media deal didn't happen without her. Charter flights? Nope. Mainstream attention that crossed over into pop culture, all because of her. She single-handedly rewrote the financial reality of the league in one season. Meanwhile, a significant chunk of the Players Association spent that same season trashing her fans, letting her get physically targeted without consequences, and generally showing they resented her success. Now, those same players want to cash in on the empire she built, while still allowing the hostility to fester. And here's the kicker. If this CBA negotiation collapses, if a lockout or work stoppage occurs, Caitlyn Clark has options: triple pay European contracts, starting her own league, or focusing on her business ventures and endorsements. She doesn't need the WNBA, but the WNBA desperately needs her. The Players Association seems to have forgotten that fundamental fact. They are negotiating like they have the upper hand, when in reality, the leverage walked in the door with one player, and that same player could walk out at any moment. This could genuinely mark the end of the Caitlyn Clark era in the WNBA. Not because she wants to leave, but because the league and its players have created conditions where leaving might be her smartest move. And if she does, that $2.2 billion media deal suddenly looks like an incredibly expensive bet on content that might not deliver. Caitlyn Clark made professional valuation possible for players, and in response, some chose to bite the hand that fed them while demanding more. That's not sustainable. That's not how you build a league. It's how you destroy one. We're at a crossroads. Either the Players Association recognizes their interests are tied to protecting and elevating their biggest star, or they continue down a path of resentment and unrealistic demands. If it's the latter, 2024 may be remembered as both the peak and the beginning of the end of the WNBA's mainstream moment. Caitlyn Clark gave this league something it never had: genuine cultural relevance, attention that crossed sports boundaries, and new fans who never watched women's basketball before. That is rare, valuable, and irreplaceable, but it can vanish just as fast as it arrived if the league and players don't realize what they have. The clock is ticking. Every stalled negotiation is another day closer to Clark deciding she's done playing in a league that profits from her but refuses to protect her. So what happens if she walks away? Does the WNBA survive without the one player who made mainstream America care? Or does the whole house of cards collapse back to where it was before she arrived? Drop your predictions in the comments. This story is far from over.